turn-based strategy, real-time strategy, spiritual successor to Sport? Total War is one of the most successful strategy game franchises ever, probably only topped by the Sid Meier Civilization series. It's a game of two halves, a turn-based strategic layer with a campaign map where players would develop their regions, use agents like spies, assassins, and diplomats to gain information and wage war strategically, and a real-time battle portion with a focus on tactics, unit counters, flanking, taking advantage of terrain, and all that wargamey goodness, that would make the most battle-hardened wargame enthusiasts blush. But you wouldn't need to be a graduate from a military academy to play, because Total War has always been much more approachable than the typical wargame, with a heavy focus on conflict. Well, it is called Total War after all. It began in 2000, right after a decade of RTS clones spawned from games such as Command & Conquer and Warcraft. British game studio Creative Assembly released Shogun Total War, and it was nothing like those RTS clones that preceded it. Actually, the game was supposed to be more like a conventional RTS, but eventually it evolved to be a more real-time tactical fare with the campaign map added later in development. It was billed as the ultimate battleground for virtual generals, and they did a brilliant job with the setting and a lot of inspiration from Sun Tzu's Art of War. Perhaps that was mainly, the way they marketed the game, but I was sold. I loved it. No other game made you feel like a general. You felt smart when you won battles, like you were using real-world tactics. And also the AI wasn't really the sharpest knife, honestly, and the greatest challenge were when you were battling against more numerous foes against the odds. This was followed up with the more colorful medieval Total War, an obvious choice many would say, heading to Europe for a more familiar setting for most strategy game players. Bigger, more variety, and more of everything was the idea here. But the engine was showing a bit of its age. One thing that stuck to memory was just how colorful the battlefields were at the end of a battle. Like the fields were filled with colorful bodies. How morbidly beautiful. Rome Total War arrived in 2004, and it came, it saw, and it conquered its way to the PCs of strategy gamers. And I would argue it was the biggest leap the entire franchise has ever had. The series finally went fully 3D. Each unit in the battlefield was rendered in 3D. At least it gave the illusions that it did. CA made smart use of levels of detail to render units using 2D mip-maps when you are fully zoomed out, so this lets you play massive battles with hundreds, even thousands of units. For old Total War vets, Rome felt more like a move towards a slightly faster paced battle. Almost RTS-like instead of the slower tactical movement of the first two games. But it was the game that put Total War on the map. Now, here's a little quiz for you. What's the best thing that came out of Australia? Well, it's Medieval 2 Total War, of course. While CA was working on the next big Total War, Creative Assembly Australia made what to me was my favorite Total War, and the expansion they made, Kingdoms, well, I believe has no equals in terms of anything CA has done since. It was a massive juggernaut of an expansion with four entirely different campaigns with their own factions. Sadly, the studio was shut down in 2013 after being renamed Sega Studios Australia, and their last game, the less said, the better. What a total waste of talent. Up to this point, CA would follow this development philosophy of doing one evolutionary game, for instance Medieval Total War, followed by a revolutionary one like Rome Total War. And this would all come crashing down right after the release of Empire Total War. Empire was the largest game in the series. Well, it was called Empire after all. You could say it was one of their most ambitious games ever made. This was, however, a much different type of Total War from the previous ones. Musket fires, line infantry, the diminished role of cavalry, which up to this point were like tanks in the game. Now they were just roving units looking for the right opportunity to engage in melee with dudes with guns. Of course, I remember people were very excited for naval battles, which were a first in a Total War game. It made sense since naval battles were strategically very important during this time period, protecting trade lanes and such. But what's nice in theory doesn't necessarily lead to an exciting game. Naval battles slowed down the entire game a bit too much to my liking. Naval battles ain't my thing. CA aimed perhaps a bit too high with Empire. The AI was a dud, extremely passive at launch, and couldn't do naval invasions, leading to a boring campaign. Napoleon Total War was the standalone expansion we needed. With campaigns broken up into smaller maps, its more focused gameplay meant it was overall better and a lot more polished. The disastrous launch of Empire was the main reason why they went back to their roots. Shogun Total War was a smaller scoped game, but much more refined, like the perfectly balanced blade of a katana, to the essentials of what made a Total War game Total War. It is personally my favorite modern day Total War. But it still had naval battles, but simplified with limited units, less of those naval battle lines and formations and positioning. It was a lot more straightforward. Then, after a successful number 2 with Shogun 2, CA did another number 2, Rome 2, which at launch, I could argue that it was even worse of a state compared to Empire Total War. And the bugs. With Rome 2, we got the last proper full-blown expansion with Total War ATTILA, because after this, CA would finally go into the fantasy realm with the Warhammer Trilogy. Now, CA didn't sell expansions anymore, but DLC of Legendary Lords. No longer do we get big new campaigns, but tiny trickles of content. Well, priced lower though, up to a certain point. Pop quiz, which is cheaper, the DLC or this definitive edition, which also includes the massive expansion? Guess what? They are both the same price. Okay, I know, it's an older game, but the newest DLC for Total War Warhammer 3 Shadows of Change is priced almost close to a full-blown expansion, but with probably less than a quarter of the content. Go ahead, I see you seething in front of your PCs. Let it all out and tell me what you think about it in the comments. With the success of the Warhammer Trilogy, which brought a ton of new gamers into the Total War fold, I'm not even sure if CA is interested in making a pure historical Total War anymore, but we will have to wait and see. Now, Total War 3 Kingdoms was like the abandoned puppy of CA. Just after one big DLC, CA just decided to pull the plug. Really makes me think about that thing I said about, them not really liking historical games these days. 3 Kingdoms was half a step towards a historical Total War. Of course, steeped in the epic tale of 3 Kingdoms with generals that can single-handedly take on hundreds of men. The game had 2 game modes, a more realistic records mode, which I suppose is like a historical mode, and romance mode with superhuman generals. The thing that 3 Kingdoms really brought to the table was improved diplomacy. Now, subterfuge was beyond just spies on the campaign map. Handling your family and your generals who would turn on you and infiltrating the ranks of your enemies was a thing, and that was something new for Total War. And I really hope they actually kind of incorporate this in newer Total Wars. And that's Total War. Wait, what's that I hear? Oh yeah, I've totally forgot about you, a Total War Saga, the unloved black sheeps of the family. We've had 2 of these, Troves of Britannia and Troy. I don't really consider Fall of Samurai as a Total War Saga game, that was more like an expansion. So these were supposed to be smaller, more focused experiences. These didn't sell well. In fact, they gave Troy for free as a day 1 Epic Games exclusive. Troy was developed by newly acquired Crytek Black Sea Studio, which was renamed to CA Sophia. It mixed mythology with historical bits and offered not 1, not 2 but 3 ways to play the game. My guess is that the poor sales led to CA abandoning this naming convention today. I mean, why else would they call their next title Total War Pharaoh, the next one from CA Sofia, and they're not calling it a Total War Saga game. Anyway, I'm gonna be talking a little bit more about Troy in my next video as I revisit it before the release of Total War Pharaoh. So if you want to hear my thoughts on Troy, I would highly appreciate it if you smack that subscribe button. Want to know what I think will be the next major Total War game? Click on this video and share your thoughts. And that's Total War Explained. Thanks for watching, bye!